Thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful being here. This is my first time in Bucharest. I feel like I'm in a talent show, like Romania's best designers or Romania's newest designers, something like that. We're going to be talking today about designing for simplicity. It's a goal that we have for almost all of our products. So just in case you would like, here's my contact information. I'll put a slide up again at the end. In case you have questions for me also, I'll be doing a Q&A at 2:30 this afternoon at the Q&A stage. So, as we talk about simplicity, the first thing that we need to acknowledge with ourselves is that it's really, really easy to make something complicated. That's the easy part of bad product design. It actually takes a lot of effort for us to make something simple. Now, ironically, how many of you know who Rube Goldberg is? Do you recognize who Rube Goldberg is? Okay, so Rube Goldberg was a cartoonist who made his entire career out of drawing very complicated machines that did very simple things. Like this: how to open a bottle of beer. That's the easiest way, right? Now, we actually play with intentional complication sometimes. So Warner Brothers cartoons incorporated into some of their most famous characters. We find it in movies such as Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. We play games that are intentionally complicated. We even have artistic hobbies. How many of you have been to San Francisco before? Any? Okay. Oh, great number. This is a ping pong roller coaster made entirely out of toothpicks in the shape of the San Francisco skyline and landmarks. And it took the guy decades to make this thing. And all it does is you put a ping pong in one end and the ball rolls through all of it and it comes out the other. But the intentional complication is fun and entertaining for people. We even do it for websites. Ling's Cars in the UK. This website and this car dealer sell more cars in the UK than anyone else with the world's crappiest website. And they did it intentionally. Unfortunately, most of our complication is not intentional. We wanted a simpler product, but we ended up with complication. And it often happens over time, and we didn't plan for it to be there. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of work in order to make something which has become complicated simple again. And that's going to be our focus today. This is a drawing exploration from Pablo Picasso, and it happened over the course of a few months in which he started to draw a bull. And he gave himself a simple task. How much of the detail of the bull can I remove from the image until I get something that is still recognizable as a bull, but which is far simpler than a detailed illustration? And he starts, you can see the arrows are showing the timeline here. What I think actually is really fascinating about this, if you take a look, you really can't see it, I'm sorry, but simple. The last row or bottom row, second from the left, is the simplest. And he decides that he had removed too much of the detail, and it was no longer sufficiently like a bull, and he had to put some of the detail back to get what he thought was the optimal, simplest bull illustration. So even Picasso struggled with simplicity, and sometimes went too far. So we're going to be talking about techniques for simplicity today. Now, as we talk about simplicity, we're going to do it in the framework of thinking about a product as a system. So I actually come at this from what seems to be like a very engineering and mathematical type of approach to design. We can define a system because systems have variables and rules. So we have data and we have equations or formulas. And we use them to describe what is the current state of that system, what is the rate of change of that system, and how does that system behave? Now, I'll give you some examples here. So, as we describe the systems, the first is the number of variables. Just how many variables do we have? And most of the products we work on have a large number of variables. They are fairly complicated to begin with. Even something as simple as a checkout flow has a large number of variables, even though it seems on the surface like it should be very simple. Now, the types of rules that the system is described by might also change. We can have linear rules where we understand exactly how things change. It just follows a straight line, and if I go over time, I know where I'm going to be in the future. Or we can have dynamic rules, and they're a lot more context sensitive, and we can't always predict where things are going to be as accurately. And talking about predictability, we can talk about systems that are either deterministic, they are very predictable, or non-deterministic. They feel much more unpredictable, or sometimes random or chaotic. And then we talk about the adaptability. Is it a system that can actually adjust under different contexts? Your body does it all the time. How many of you have ever walked on an airplane in flight? Yeah. So you maintain your balance even though the airplane is actually moving slightly. Well, it's probably moving at about 700 miles an hour, but it's jiggling a little bit. And you still walk down the aisle. And all of those little bobbles and movements that you make are an adaptive system designed to keep you upright and not face planted in the aisle of the plane. Right. So we can describe systems on a continuum. We can have a simple system, which is often what we're looking for. We can have a complicated system, which is often what we unintentionally end up with. We can have a complex system, and we'll talk more about that one in a moment. There is a difference between complex and complicated. And then we could have a chaotic system. And we could have a whole other talk on what the chaotic systems are, so we're actually not going to be talking about that one today. But perhaps an illustration is a little easier. So the simple, the complicated, the complex, and the chaotic. Our goal is for simple, so we're going to be talking about the two in the middle, the complicated and the complex. And the techniques that we talk about can be applied to both. So let's describe in a little bit more detail what a complicated versus a complex system is. And actually, I like this alternate definition better. A complicated system is a system of many parts. And it's hard to understand how those parts all fit together and interact. And it takes a lot of experience and time and learning to understand how to use it. A complex system is actually a system of systems. You have a bunch of simpler systems that are all interacting with one another. So we don't immediately understand how it's operating on the surface, but curiously, it has a small number of variables in most cases. It's just that it's a system of systems. Sometimes we have naturally complex systems, like this, one of my favorite traffic circles on the planet. So we have a system of pedestrians, a system of roadway and transit directions, a system of vehicles and how they interact. And so now we have drivers in cars, cars with other cars, and groups of cars on roads with groups of people. This is a complex system because it's a system of systems. Right. Our goal as designers is to help people understand, right? I think you've probably heard the phrase, is it understood? And if it is understood by the end user, that's the most important thing. If they know what to do and what is going to happen next, you've got a simpler product. Now, unfortunately, too often our products are complicated. I have a peculiar hobby. I take photos of parking garage kiosks from around the world. For one reason primarily, and that is that parking garage kiosks are uniformly terrible design, no matter where you are on the planet. I got trapped in an underground parking garage in Sofia a couple years ago because I couldn't figure out how to use the machine. And there was only one light bulb in the entire place as well. So this is not what our goal is, right? Our goal is to avoid things like this. So how do we get to complication, right? We said it happens, we don't plan for it, but how does it happen? So when we start any new project, and this is probably going to resonate with almost everyone here, when we start any new project, we're like, I got this. I understand it. I know what I'm supposed to do. I know where we're going. I know what the product or the feature is or what the service is. let's go. And you get the team together and you're all energized and you present a vision and everyone starts to head in that direction. And then someone says, oh, by the way, and there's another requirement that pops up. Or they say, oh, I have this great idea. Wouldn't it be cool if? And suddenly another thing gets added to the list. Or they say, hey, this is looking really good. Now let's. And then they expand and make something bigger than it was before. And just when we think we're about ready to start building things, someone on the tech team says, yeah, the system doesn't support that. And so now you have to figure out how to work around it and do something in a different way. But eventually we get to the point where we're like, oh, I've checked off all of the features in the PRD, everything's there, thank God we're done. But unfortunately, the peak of the curve also happens to be the peak of complication. We started out with grand aspirations for this great product, and over time we made a complete product, but unfortunately that product is not simple. Right? So, how do they become complicated? This is just a few ways. Maybe poor design methods. It happens. Maybe poor product management, or poor product judgment, or poor product strategy. Maybe there are technical issues, constraints, things that the system can't do, data that you don't have access to. Maybe there are just constraints and requirements that you didn't anticipate, or you're operating in a regulatory environment that places a lot of constraints on you. Anyone who works in financial services or healthcare and medicine, yes, right? You don't get a simple product the first time around, not because you don't want to, but because there's a book of regulations that constrain what you can do and how you can do it, and it leads to complication. It happens gradually, right? It sneaks up on us. Oh, it's so cute, right? Ah, boom, oh, damn. But eventually, the light bulb goes off. We're like, oh, this is a mess. This is complicated. This isn't as good as it should be. And someone on the team says, I know, let's make it simpler, which sounds like a great goal. So let's give you some techniques that we can use. Now, as we talk about these techniques, I do want to start with a quick caveat. Not everything should be simple. Sometimes there are reasons when you want people to slow down and think about what's happening. That's why we don't have Amazon's one-click purchase for nuclear weapons. It's why we don't actually have a big red button that is used to launch missiles. 2 people, multiple keys, passcodes, verification sequences. It's complicated intentionally so that we don't accidentally obliterate ourselves. Sometimes too much simplicity can be bad. It can backfire on us. How many of you know what these are? The Amazon One buttons, right? This is a great idea in the sense, oh, I'm out of razors. Oh, tap, and then the next day razors arrive. I need more trash bags. Tap, and the next day trash bags arrive. Oh, all my clothes are dirty and I have no detergent. Tap, and detergent arrives, right? But when might simplicity not be a goal? Sometimes fast and friction-free aren't always ideal. I'm not going to read all of these for you, but we can make mistakes. Sometimes there are irreversible interactions. Sometimes people really don't understand what's happening because it was so fast. Press the button, and how did I end up with 500 trash bags? Well, you pressed it 10 times. No, I didn't. Yeah, it happened somehow. Maybe you don't understand how the system actually works. Maybe this is an easy way to subvert or mislead people. Maybe there's unintended consequences. Now, that sounds like a great idea, right? Unless you have addiction issues or you're underage. So should it be as easy for everyone, or are there exceptions? All right, so some difficulty and complexity can be a good thing. It protects us from ourselves. Financial services have regulations so that you don't accidentally buy really bad stocks. And they verify, is this really what you want? Are you sure this is what you want? You're certain this is the one for this amount that you want. Yes? Yes? Okay, now you can own it, right? So they do that on purpose. Right? So the goals for simplicity, we have to balance them with sometimes that need for a bit of friction. But we still have the goals. We want to reduce time and effort and stress for people. We want to enhance the product. We want to make things more meaningful. We want to make them more valuable. We want to improve the quality. And we also want to help people. We want them to learn and to create, to solve and decide and remember and all the things that it is that humans do. But in the end, if we think about it like this, people just want to feel effective, intelligent, and confident. I can do this, I know how to do this, and I am confident that I can achieve these goals or these outcomes. So Einstein, and this may be a misattribution, if you do the research on this quotation, sometimes it says, yeah, he said it, and sometimes they're like, no, he didn't. But I'm going to give him credit anyway, because everyone knows who Einstein is, and it's a great quotation. So, make everything as simple as possible, but no simpler. That's what Picasso did with his bull. He went too far, and so he backed up. As simple as possible, but no simpler. So, how much detail is actually necessary? Let's play a quick game here. I'm going to start to add some detail to the screen. And when you recognize what is being formed on the screen, just raise your hand. Don't call it out. Don't ruin it for others. Keep it your little secret. But when you figure out what you're seeing, raise your hand. Anyone? Got a few hands up already. Anyone changing their mind? Any more hands? That always does it. Okay. How much detail is necessary? One is Walt Disney, one is Damien Hirst. Damien Hirst's DOT exercise was to extract as much detail as necessary while still retaining the identifiable object. The challenge here, though, is that it requires prior cultural knowledge. You would only recognize this if you already knew who Mickey Mouse is. How many of you have never heard of Mickey Mouse? Yeah. It's a shared cultural piece of knowledge, right? So we all were able to recognize it at some point. But if you did not have that piece of knowledge, those dots would have been meaningless to you. Right? And so we have the law of parsimony, that all things being equal, the simpler solution is better than the complicated one. All right, so we're here at the top, feature complete. So what do we do? How do we deal with this? Get rid of the complication. Well, we could do nothing. We could just finish the product and launch it. And in the course of launching it and doing a little bit of bug fixing and QA, we'd make it a little bit simpler. But we essentially have an as-is, unnecessarily complicated product. If we go a little bit further, well, here. A sufficiently motivated person will tolerate an inordinate amount of crap. So if you're the only product in the market and someone really, really needs it, they're going to use your product. If you are a competitive product in a competitive market and you have a complicated product, they're going to use something else. So what is really motivating them and what is their level of choice? So in most cases, we don't want the as-is option. We want to work a little bit harder. So if we go a little bit further, we end up just making superficial changes to clarify things. Maybe we rearrange a couple buttons, or we change some labels, or we rewrite some content, but it's not a fundamental change to the product. If we work further still, we end up making more structural changes, rearranging things within the product itself in order to put them in more logical places. And then it's easier to understand. But what we really need to do is to put in that extra level of work that is focused on flow. This is now we actually might change the way something works in order to make it work better. We're not just changing the words, we're not just painting a new visual design on top of it, we're making fundamental structural and flow changes to the product itself. I'll show some examples as we go. Inevitably, someone on the team, especially someone from finance, is going to say, you want to keep designing the product after you've finished designing it? Yes. Yes, yes, we do. Because this is where simplification happens. We get to feature complete with complication, and then it takes iteration and focus to get to a simple product. Unfortunately, we sometimes overlook these opportunities to simplify. So here are some things to look out for on your product teams. I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. There's just one thing per slide. Are you designing for yourself, or are you designing for an end user that you understand and have studied? Bob was just up here. Where do people struggle? Not where do you struggle, where do people struggle, right? Leading with technology. I have this amazing widget. You're going to love it. You need it. Meanwhile, the guy with his head in a bucket is thinking, why did I agree to this? Right? So leading with technology is a solution in search of a problem. Product by consensus. Everyone on the team has to agree. Yeah, that's probably going to end up with bloat and complication. We make assumptions at the beginning of every product, hypotheses, conjectures, guesses. We have to evaluate those guesses. But unfortunately, what happens with assumptions, if we don't evaluate them, they tend to become an assumed truth. And we have no data to verify that they actually are true. It's just folklore on the product team. Oh, it's always this way. It's what people want. Show me the data. Oh, yeah. Let me get that for you. Shifting effort to the users. Anytime you say, let the user do it, give the user choice, let the user decide, you've shirked your responsibility as a product creator. Our job is to do the work for them, not figure out what work to give them. If your user says your product is messy and confusing, believe them. They're not stupid. They're telling you the truth. I don't like it. It doesn't work well. I don't understand it. So listen to them. If you try to be everything to everyone, you end up doing nothing well for anyone. Homer Simpson in the Homermobile. And then finally, the just-in-case situation. Well, there might be some people who need it in some situations, so let's go ahead and add it. Do you have the data to validate that it's actually necessary to put in? I mean, really, I'm just packing for a weekend getaway. I just don't know if I'm going to need a tent or a sleeping bag or a camp stove or 3 changes of clothes and a tuxedo. I don't know. Just in case, let me pack it. So what do we do to reduce the complication? So you could use foundational design methods. If you're using good design methods to begin with, you're already a step ahead because you're introducing less complication. So identify, define, and frame the problem you're trying to solve. Do you know exactly what it is you are trying to do for people? Using user-centered design methods and understanding them and their flow and their motivations and expectations. Empathy is such a popular word as well. Use critical thinking. Don't just assume, but evaluate, get data, think systematically, make rational decisions about what you do or don't do with the product. And then, of course, iterate. You never get it simple or right the first time around. It takes some iteration. So we've got some methods that we can use to simplify. The first that people go to right away, subtraction. Right? Just get rid of stuff. But there's other techniques. It doesn't have to be just reduction or get rid of things. Sometimes we've broken things up into too many parts, too many little pieces scattered around, and what we really should do is bring the things back together that belong together. So sometimes we just consolidate. Sometimes we have to redistribute things. We've got them in the wrong place or in the wrong order, or maybe we created something that was too big and complicated, and if we divide it into smaller steps, it feels more manageable. And then if we prioritize, how do we help people understand what is the most important or most likely thing they need to do? You can't have every button on the screen with equal priority, because then no one knows where to look or what to interact with. And then we want to clarify. And this is a lot of actual content in many cases, but it's also about the UI design itself. How do we change the information that is being presented in a way that makes it more meaningful? So here are some examples from the Android team. How many of you have Android phones? Good number? Okay, so have you had them for years? Yes? Okay. So you have seen the nav bar over time, right? And you can see the visual changes of the navigation bar up until last year that got us to the one little pill, the little capsule down at the bottom there. In the latest version, we've introduced full gestural interactions in the Pixel 4. So we had the full 3 buttons, then 1 button, and now no buttons. Because it's a full gestural interaction. So it has simplified, right? We have moved things, we have changed, we have subtracted. Let's skip this one because it doesn't show up very well. Volume controls. The original Android volume controls, whenever you hit the volume button, no matter what you were doing on your phone, you got the ringer. Seriously, I'm listening to music. I want to change the volume on my music, and when I hit the volume button, you're going to change the ringer? So what did we do? We moved it, and we understand what you're doing on your phone and what's making noise at the time, and when you press the volume control, that's the thing you're controlling. But we also gave you shortcuts to other things like notifications and a mute button. Quick settings change. People didn't understand if it was on or off. So the first change was to make it much more clear, is something on or off? But that had 2 tap zones. Sometimes you press the button, sometimes you press the label, and people never got it right. So now there's 1 tap zone, and there's a difference between a short tap and a long tap instead of having 2 different tap zones. Notifications. People get too many, they want to control them, they have no idea where the notification came from. So now if you get a notification, you just swipe a little bit to the left and there's a gear, and it gives you the settings for the notifications for the app that sent that notification. And you can change your settings right from the notification itself. And we've introduced digital well-being. People feel overwhelmed by their phones, to give you access to information so that you understand how you're actually using it, so that you know how to take control of it. All right. I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. We're over by a minute or 2 here. Unfortunately, what happens over time is that there's the law of conservation of complexity, and complexity moves. And if we take a look at something such as watching a movie, how we watched a movie 50 years ago is radically different than how we watch a movie today. Film projectors have given way to things like Roku devices and Chromecast and Fire TV. But all we've really done is move the complexity. Now, watching a movie requires a television, a dongle, and a smartphone, that you have to connect all of them and get them to work together. I just wanted to watch the Avengers. Sometimes we've got to use multiple methods, and experiences can feel simpler even if they are longer or have more steps. I really like the example of wayfinding in airports, because when you're looking at a wayfinding sign in the airport, the next sign for where you're going is almost always visible. So you walk literally from sign to sign, and you feel very confident that you know what you're going, where you're going, because they tell you this way, and you can see the next sign. Walk toward the next one. Value versus pain. People do an evaluation in their head. I really want this, but if it's going to be too much effort to do it, I'm not going to do it. So that's where the simplicity comes in. I'm going to skip that one. Motivation and tolerance. These are sharing icons circa 2012, when social media was really starting to take off. Everybody wanted to share everything, but nobody had a button that they recognized, right? I want to share this. No, I don't want to print. No, 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 I don't want to download. No, I did not want to save. No, I'm not bookmarking this. How do I share things? So this actually is a really good example that sometimes metrics aren't telling you the real story. Counting interactions is not always a measure of intent or purpose. So if someone doesn't know how to use your tool, they're tapping all over the place to try and figure it out, and someone in marketing is saying, look at all the engagement. No, look at all the confusion. Duration of the interaction is not always a measure of engagement. I've done 37 things and I've been through this step 12 times and now, finally I'm done, and it took me 9 minutes. And someone looking at the metrics is, look at how long they're using our product. They must love us. No, they had no idea what to do. You're just lucky they stuck around long enough to finish. And then task completion rate doesn't tell us if the person enjoyed the experience or not. It merely tells us they completed a task. And sometimes they completed the task despite our product. All right, so feature complete, the top of the curve, does not mean your product is experience optimized. When we're up here, this is not when you stop, right? When we're up there, that's when we use our simplification methods. That's when we rely on a toolkit like this to iterate and to polish and to refine. And then we choose our path out. How much more iteration are we willing to do to get to the most simple, most optimal product possible? All right, thank you. I know we went a few minutes over, sorry about that. Contact info here again, and I'll be on the Q&A stage at 2:30, I think. Yes, all right, thank you. Thank you.